So the generic solution. So this really is pretty much what we've been talking about. But this is where you're looking at, you're picking up relevant industry information. You're looking at things like SDCW, SOLAS. You're looking at those kind of, maybe TMSA, whatever. You're looking at sort of things that are out there in the public domain, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to pick that one for me. In other words, someone's done a really good job of mapping out gas competencies. I want to just be a really good gas operator. That makes sense for me to do that, and to then have that and be able to evidence that I follow those rules. And that's a pretty simple kind of approach. Essentially, it's one we've been talking about. But there is another approach as well, which is much more complex. And we've also really just been talking about this as well, I think, in as we've been going. And that's really looking a little bit deeper. So you might be looking again at all that stuff that's out there in the public domain, all the register best practice guidance, all that sort of stuff. But you also look about what's typical to your company. And you mentioned there the sort of the mission side of it, what it is you're trying to achieve. But you can also look at the kinds of accidents and incidents. I showed you the PSC data, for example, there. We quite often see when we mine that through with customers, they're quite often surprised by some of the areas that they're getting hurt by, and it helps them to look at where they can adjust their training schedule, training strategies and stuff around there. So it might be your audits that you've done as well. It might be stuff coming through from inspections and procedures, your company KPIs and things you want to achieve. And that's really where this sort of customized approach comes in. And you might want to blend some of those industry standards and off the peg things and start to put them together. Nikolai, just out of interest, taking a sort of a broad brush through all the customers you've worked with, of the two sort of approaches, what would you say is the most common that you find?
Oh, both are common and relevant, but I see the ones. My impression is that the most successful ones are the ones that are building their own system. They're generating the bespoke system. The challenge here is not adding complexity, but keeping it simple, keeping it concentrated. We see. I always like to look at the airline industry because I feel they are a bit ahead on the curve, and then comes maritime, and then the rest of the world follows when it comes to training and competence of their active personnel. And you see the airline industry, they started to see a lot of human errors, a lot of accidents and near misses, and they built the checklist before takeoff, and that worked like a charm. But they kept adding, because this is nice, this is nice, this is nice, this is nice. Here we have some issues. And then they saw that instead of going down, the accidents started to rise exponentially. And it is quite obvious and simple. It's when everything is important, nothing is important. So they have now returned and condensed it down to a single A5 where they have the checklist of the most important elements. So don't be afraid of don't create a mountain when you start out with a bespoke system. Yeah. Create it gradually, drop by drop. We know, as we talked, it's a busy day on board. They have their tasks. If they get 1,000 proficiencies turned on their head, they're going to be, wow, we can't handle this. But if you give them 1, if you give them 2, every quarter you might realize it. So
yeah,
it's
but also as well, I think the other thing is to say is that there's a lot of good things that happen in terms of proficiency and competency building on board a ship. And the other inverse way of looking at it is if you're not recording it, measuring it, and getting it down, you're also doing a disservice to those people in terms of being able to kind of understand and know where they are. So it's trying to achieve that balance, I think.